So before we get into it, I'm going to be using the word Christian as an umbrella term to describe people who follow the Holy Bible and worship Jesus Christ as either God or God's Son. Under this big tent, there's like a ton of subsets of Christianity, each with its own set of rules, interpretations like Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, Protestantism, Evangelicals, Mormon, Jehovah's Witnesses, and probably like 1,000 more. Apologies if I pronounced any of them wrong, because I'm going to be targeting all of you in this video. I want to clarify that I'm not talking about every single Christian out there, obviously. I've said it before that I'm friends with many Christians who genuinely live by the principles of kindness and compassion. And because I have Christian friends, they often interact with a lot of Christian content, which will come up on my page. Some of it's fine, like father pastors who do like silly dances and jokes so they can connect with the youth, Christian fan art that is not made by AI, mind you. But with every good thing, there's always a subset of people who like to ruin it for everyone. And that's what I want to get into today. I'm not trying to offend anybody because I would hope that people who do believe in Christ would agree with what I have to say. To love your religion is to love it enough to call out those who disrupt others in its name. This video is about like a specific mindset within this religion, not an attack on all believers as a whole. My partner is Christian, my best friend is Christian, but they would never pull this kind of behavior. I recently made a video on religious hate, and while there were many respectful religious views, which includes Muslim, Christian, atheist, and polytheist commenters, but specifically some Christians, not all of course, took issue, especially those who use God's name to spread hatred. Honestly, I didn't want to single out Christians because they seem to be very highly sensitive to criticism, especially here in the southern part of the United States of America. This is why I included various religions in the discussion, because American Christians often ask, why aren't other religions being criticized too? So I read like multiple texts from like Quran, Torah, and looked up information on Buddhism and less commonly known religions like Sikhism to find faults in them too, to show that no organized religion is free from criticism. Nothing is, because if it exists in the hands of humans, it's not exempt from criticism. But despite this attempted broader approach, a lot of people who claim to be Christians in my comment section still felt personally attacked and felt like their religion specifically was free from criticism. Let me show you this very long comment I got on one of my videos. You're welcome to pause and read it because holy shit, but I'm gonna summarize it anyways. Firstly, this person went on quite the rant saying that I was joking about predatorily telling kids about stuff they shouldn't know. I actually wasn't joking about that. I did indeed tell my young family member that there are intersex people in this world, and their parents didn't even know that intersex people existed despite it being a part of human anatomy. This person claims that there's only two genders, and that intersex people have a birth defect, but they often still have a gender. They are factually born with biological traits that don't fit in the typical male or female categories. Doctors often assign them a gender at birth, typically based on the dominant physical traits, and historically, such infants were often treated surgically to make their external sexual organs look like their dominant sex. But it turns out this has nothing to do with the child's actual gender identity, because just because they have a dominant traits of one sex doesn't mean it'll be consistent as they grow older. In fact, the practice of assigning a gender at birth has been criticized by many health organizations because it can lead to confusion and psychological distress later in life. I know that assigning genders can make things more easier, so I'm not bashing on that, but still, it's a fact. They tried to back up their homophobia by saying the Bible clearly condemns homosexuality. Well, that's not entirely true either. The term homosexuality wasn't even in the Bible till the 1940s. Before that, the verses typically cited, like Leviticus 18:22, referred to practices related to temple prostitution or pedophilia, not consensual same-sex relationships. But even when the Bible prohibits pedophilia, there seems to be an outstanding number of religious powerful people who skip over that line. Because believe it or not, translators also have their own biases when it comes to translating stuff that was written by another human, mind you, because none of us was there. So yeah, maybe I'm wrong, but if you disagree with me, you also have an equal possibility of being wrong as well. The Bible has been mistranslated and edited countless times, and it's a historical fact that many of its current interpretations are influenced by cultural biases, not divine mandates. It's funny how people like this cherry pick their Bible verses to justify hatred, but conveniently ignore the central message of loving thy neighbor. Jesus never said love thy neighbor unless you're gay. One of his most important teachings was love your neighbors as yourself, which he mentioned in Matthew 22:39. He called this the second greatest commandment, right after loving God, obviously. The whole point was to show unconditional love, empathy towards others, no exceptions listed. Which is also why I condemn people who say, well, being a gay Christian is an oxymoron. There's no such thing as a gay Christian. Well, being a judgmental Christian is also an oxymoron. There's no such thing as a human saint. As much as I don't worship anything, it's really infuriating that I have to recite holy text to the people who claim to have read it. Then they go off about abortion being the most evil act, claiming that it's a crime against humanity. The irony of that is that the Bible doesn't explicitly condemn abortion. In fact, Numbers 5:11-31 is a passage often cited because it describes a ritual for a woman suspected of infidelity, which could induce a miscarriage. The Bible was more concerned about property rights, with a wife being her husband's property, than the sanctity of a fetus. Thank you to my viewers who made me aware of that verse, by the way. The closest the Bible comes to discussing life is in Genesis 2:7, where life begins when God breathes life into Adam, indicating that life indeed begins at first breath, not conception. Then they try the classic, don't punish the babies for the father's actions, in the case of a rape argument. This perspective completely lacks empathy for the mother and ignores the trauma inflicted onto the victim. The rapist often faces minimal consequences, if any, because apparently they can still be president now, while the victim is forced into a lifelong reminder of their trauma. It's hypocritical to claim to value life when dismissing the immense suffering and mental health implications for the victim. What kind of relationship do you think the child of a non-consensual act will have with their parents? You don't know? It's none of our business? Yeah, I agree, because the decision should be theirs and no one else's. And once again, they end their abortion rant by saying people who get abortions deserve the most painful, cruelest, slowest death ever, blah blah blah, yet still claim to be pro-life. This is actually when I thought, oh, like, okay, this comment is satire, because there's no way, right? But I forget that people can be genuine morons. The cognitive dissonance here is astounding. Then he brings up the story of the binding of Isaac, saying it's a lesson trusting God because only God can tell you to abort a baby. Okay then, all the abortion in the States were God's will then. What now? Are you going to blindly follow what I say? Or are you going to doubt me using your critical thinking skills because you're older than 5? I talked about this story in the video that he was commenting about, and why it's harmful if you don't have any media literacy when it comes to that story. If someone were to approach you telling you the reason they aborted their pregnancy was because God told them to, would you believe them? Abraham was ready to sacrifice his son because he believed God demanded it. Do you believe that story is real? That Abraham really heard the voice of God? Or was it a lesson of what happens when you blindly follow a concept? I don't know if this person thought their deity was whispering in their ear to write that comment, but it's very clear that they're projecting anger and misdirected hostility under the guise of faith, interpreting their religion in a way that justifies hatred while ignoring the real-life evidence of their history and evolution of their own text. It's so weird to me that so many people who claim to be Christians don't understand that Christianity has caused irreparable damage to American society. For centuries, Christianity has been the dominant religion in the US, deeply embedded into politics, culture, and societal norms. As the country has grown more diverse and secular, many of these people who claim to have found God see these changes as a direct threat of their way of life. So when you've been the loudest voice in a room for so long, even a whisper of critique feels like an attack. I need everyone to understand that this is an actual persecution. It's just discomfort with no longer holding unchecked power. I made a video where I was talking about when people kept posting the "don't let politics dictate your relationships," that corny ass bullshit. And I never mentioned religion in that video, but I still got a religious debate in my comments. I am desperately begging Christians to keep their faith in the church and follow the Constitution when it comes to America specifically. Jesus is not king for everyone. He can be king of your life, you can follow him, I won't stop you, but he's not king of my life. In a mixing pot country with so many beliefs, no single religious perspective should dictate laws everyone must follow. These people who pride themselves on being Christian bark and whine when laws are based on another religion's rules, so why impose theirs on others? Again, from the Crusades to the Inquisition and more recently the support of discriminatory policies in the US, Christianity has a long history of not being the victim, but rather the aggressor in the US. And that history is still present today, particularly within Christian nationalist circles, continue to believe that African American Christians or indigenous Christians are inherently lesser or not practicing true Christianity. They justify these ideas by twisting scripture, citing verses out of context, or relying on biased interpretations like those founded in the slave Bible. This edited version of the Bible deliberately removed passages about freedom and equality, leaving only texts about obedience and servitude to reinforce slavery as a divine mandate. Colonizers weaponized the Bible to justify enslaving African American people and eradicating indigenous culture. They label anything outside their European Christian norms as savage or heathen. Do not forget that these views did not disappear. They only evolved into more subtle but still harmful forms of racism and cultural superiority within modern Christian nationalism. For Black Christians, their faith is constantly being dismissed as less genuine by white Christians who conveniently ignored the role of black churches played in civil rights movements and community resilience. For Native Christians, it's the lingering erasure of their culture where converting to Christianity meant abandoning sacred traditions and deemed incompatible with civilized faith. Whenever Natives go back to Native religions, Christians decide to shame them and claim that they're reverting back to being savage, all by cherry-picking the Bible to maintain power and hierarchy, so Christian nationalists continue to perpetuate the same oppressive dynamics under a different guise. So when Christian nationalists claim that they're being oppressed in modern discussions, it's almost laughable. Like, you've been the default in Western society for centuries. Laws, cultures, and norms have been shaped to cater to your beliefs. And now, because people want to live without your rules governing their lives, you suddenly think you're under attack? Obviously, the groups that you've spent eons oppressing aren't going to write you glowing reviews as the good guys. Instead of taking a hard look at history, they make it all about themselves. All people want is to live their lives without being forced to adhere to rules that only make sense if you believe in the same deity. That's literally the definition of religious freedom: the rights for everyone to believe or not to believe without being forced into specific religion's rules. But of course, Christian nationalists see this as a personal affront, as if asking for fairness is the same as going against God. It's not, but instead of acknowledging that, they slap on the victim label because it's easier to say we're being oppressed by a godless culture than to admit that people are tired of having someone else's beliefs shoved down their throats. It's honestly hilarious and how hypocritical this is. Christian nationalists demand respect for their beliefs, and when others ask for the same respect, suddenly it's, no, you're oppressing me just because I'm Christian. Oh yes, in America, the country where Christianity has been the dominant religion for centuries, clearly other religions are waging war against you when someone dares to say, hey, your God isn't mine. Respect goes both ways. There's this growing divide between Christians who genuinely find peace in their faith and those who use their beliefs to disrupt the peace of others. Like one of my favorite artists, Anna Miriam Brown, creates content centered around Christianity in such a compassionate and welcoming way. She doesn't shove fear and brimstone down anyone's throats. Instead, she just shares her faith with joy, engaging with people, guiding them to God, and actually listening to their struggles. She doesn't blame their hardships on not praying hard enough or being non-believers. But who are the people in her comments with the most hateful things to say? Not atheists, not Muslims, Christians. They're mad because she draws Jesus as a Middle Eastern man. Historically accurate, mind you, because that doesn't fit their blue-eyed, blonde-haired savior fantasy. They even whine about her, including probably the most lighthearted jokes accusing her of mocking God, even though the Bible literally depicts Jesus as sociable with everyone, which includes being able to have a sense of humor. Yet, it's precisely this approach that some Christians find threatening. They're so entrenched in their "you're gonna burn if you don't follow Christianity like me" mindset that anything deviating from their rigid interpretations feels like a mockery, even when it's obvious that she's a devout Christian. It's ironic the very people who claim to represent Jesus often seem the furthest from embodying his teachings of love and understanding. The institution that surrounds Christianity just feels like such a grift. A plethora of free Bible apps with in-app purchases? Christian influencers with a TikTok shop full of dropshipping Christian talking bracelets? Christian influencers once again stealing abusive parent videos from homosexual kids being kicked out to use it for pity from other Christians so they buy their Christian merch? Christians who go to restaurants and hit on the underage waitress in front of their wives and children, rack up the bill, and then leave a fake $100 bill that says Jesus will tip you in life? Wow! What part of these actions reflect an unearthly, humble, and forgiving God? I do admit, it's very tempting to buy some of this stuff, especially if you feel like it proves your love for God to other humans. Like some Christian clothing goes hard, I will admit. But I am begging you to be aware that money is an earthly asset. Give it to the poor if you want to get rid of it so badly. Supporting predatory businesses disguised as religious devotion only fuels greed, not spirituality. Faith shouldn't come with a price tag or a drop-shipping hustle. And that's the problem with Christian nationalists, because they can't seem to understand that their own methods are what push people away. You've heard the saying, love the sinner but hate the sin. Well, here's my rebuttal. Love the Christian, but hate the Christianity. I can respect and love individuals who just happen to be believers, who live their faith through compassion and humility. But the institution of Christianity seems to be fueled by the devil, if anything. Christian nationalists often promote prosperity, gospel ideals claiming that wealth is a sign of God's favor because if you have money, it's because God gave it to you. Yet Jesus explicitly called out greed and emphasized humility and service, flipping tables of money changers in the temple. Matthew 21 21:12-13, and teaching that it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of the needle than it is for a rich person to enter heaven, Mark 10:25. He also taught compassion for the least of these, including strangers and the marginalized. Yet many Christian nationalists push for the opposite of what Christ would have wanted, showing little regard for these teachings because for some reason they always think that everyone else is after them. Because blaming Satan is just so much easier than taking accountability. If demons are your go-to excuse for being a terrible person, then congratulations, you've officially missed the entire point of your own religion. But no, you're a good person, right? It's obviously Satan controlling you to do evil things because that's way more plausible, right? I know atheists do something very similar, but that's for another day. But anyway, sure. Why do people always target Christianity? Are people only making fun of Christians, or is that the only bigotry you pay attention to? Jewish people face harassment, violence, and systemic discrimination. They die due to the unjustified hate that Christians, atheists, Muslims, and more all spread. Muslim women who are being forced to remove their hijabs in the name of freedom. Hindus and Sikhs are constantly lumped together with Muslims by people too ignorant to know the difference. They're harassed for wearing head coverings and practicing their faith in peace, especially post 9/11. But yes, Christians face the most oppression because people laugh at you when you perform an exorcism in your car. To claim allegiance to a religion that prides itself on empathy, it's baffling how many Christians seem to lack the very virtue they preach. Jesus, yes, the guy that you claim to follow, was on record as one of the most loving and accepting people ever. He didn't sit around wishing hell on people who didn't agree with him. He hung out with tax collectors, sex workers, leopards, and skeptics, some of the people that American Christians would try their dang darn best to avoid. We've got modern Christians weaponizing hell as if Jesus personally handed them the authority to judge others to send them to hell. By the way, hell didn't even start with Christianity. It's from Germanic mythology, not the Bible. Hell, as eternal damnation, is more of a blend of Dante's Inferno and medieval storytelling than anything Jesus preached. So why are some Christians so obsessed with condemning others when their own religious figure actively didn't? If Jesus came to America today, I'll bet you a fig tree with ripe, fresh figs that these types of Christians would be the first to crucify him. It's hard to believe that these actions align with the teachings of a loving and forgiving God. If anything, it's a terrible PR campaign for faith. Check your fellow Christians before badgering everyone else about why we don't believe in their greedy, fear-driven version of faith. I joke that I'm not going to heaven whenever I do something stupid around my partner. And he tells me in return, well, if I'm right and you're wrong, I'm carrying you with me in the rapture. Which makes me laugh, but it also reminds me of my past interactions with certain religious friends who would take that moment to preach instead. God's mad at you for not believing, they'd say. Just repent and he'll let you in. No thank you. If heaven is full of people like you, mean-spirited and confident that you get a VIP pass because you believe in God's existence, then no, I'm good, because I hope you realize that that's also wrong according to the Bible. It's pretty explicit about this. Not everyone who calls out Lord, Lord gets into heaven. It's not about just checking binary requirement boxes that say believes in God while spending your time making an ass of yourself and me to everyone. But when someone points out their harmful behavior, their go-to defense is, I'm just spreading love. God told me to do that. Don't blame me. Take it up with God. That, folks, is called shifting blame. It's not hard to share what you love while treating everybody with respect. Psyche K is my favorite show, and I think everyone's lives would be better if they watched it too. But I'm not gonna tell people blood is gonna drip out of every pore if they don't watch it. It's not helpful, not kind, and not relative of the values that I stand for. Like I'm doing in this video, I brought up some Bible verses in my religious video. The commenters who claimed to be Christian had a similar claim that the testimonies I listed don't count anymore. So you're openly admitting that some rules were culturally significant to ancient times, like not sleeping with your mother? Yes, that is a real verse, by the way. But do you realize what that concession does to your entire religion? If the Old Testament rules can be dismissed as irrelevant, then what exactly is Christianity based on? The Old Testament is Christianity's foundation. Without it, the New Testament doesn't even make any sense. It's like tearing down the first floor of a house and insinuating the second floor will stand. So which is it? Are you bound to the outdated laws of the Old Testament? Or are you cherry-picking the parts of the New Testament that conveniently support your worldview? Because if Jesus came to fulfill the law, as Christians often claim, then ignoring the parts of the law that make you uncomfortable completely dismantles the argument that the Bible is divine, unchanging word of God. You can't have it both ways. Either all of it matters, or none of it does. But at the end of the day, these commenters don't harm me. Why? They're actually proving my claims in that video, that religious people in general just simply love to go cherry-picking. Nobody wants to believe in Jesus anymore. There are literally tens of thousands to millions of people who would be open to hearing about Christianity if it weren't for the way it's being presented to them. But instead of self-reflection, they go, everyone else is the problem. They're just stupid, and because of that, they're gonna burn. And then they pretend to be sad about it. Yeah, super convincing pitch. Alienate the very people you claim to care about. People don't close themselves off to new ideas without reason. If your version of Christianity starts with fear-mongering or dehumanization, why would anyone want to listen? People are tired of being talked at. They want human connection, not condemnation. If you can't share your beliefs without resorting to threats or superiority complexes, maybe you should sit down and think about why people might be tuning you out. People from all walks of life, teens, addicts, LGBTQ folks, and even Satanists are drawn to faith because of kindness, not fear-mongering. That's why I'll never understand the mental gymnastics of ostracizing people in the name of faith, like calling non-binary folks demons because only demons refer to themselves as they, them, we, us. Were you all homeschooled by a trad wife who thinks vaccines are filled with autism serum? Because pronouns exist everywhere. Even in your holy book. Jesus literally calls Satan he in Matthew 12:25. If Satan drives out Satan, he is divided against himself. Then how can his kingdom stand? Oh, so are all men secretly Satan now? Obviously not. Be so serious right now. God is non-binary, and that's not me reaching, it's literally theology. God is not a human being. He exists beyond the gender binary because he is a divine entity. The Bible uses he, him pronouns, sure, but that's more about the limits of language than God's identity. God transcends gender, which makes sense because assigning human limitations to an omnipotent being is kind of absurd, isn't it? The idea of Jesus being romantically or sexually involved is basically heretical to mainstream Christianity. Kinda sounds like Jesus was arrow ace if he was interested in earthly labels. Why would an omnipotent God who designed an entire universe care about who people love or how they identify? The Bible itself shows God prioritizing bigger picture issues like justice, mercy, and caring for the oppressed. If God created diversity in nature, animals that change sex, plants that can self-pollinate, and ecosystems that thrive on difference, why would he design humanity to be rigid, that's inconsistent? Why would a loving God celebrate the complexity and diversity of creation? If God truly governs all creation with love and intention, then why wouldn't LGBTQ plus people be a part of that divine plan? If the Christian God's most evident influences in nature, such as weather, wouldn't we see catastrophic signs targeting pride parades if he disapproved? But those parades happen every year without divine calamity, and if miscarriages are viewed by some as a sign of God's will, then wouldn't that logic extend to LGBTQ plus individuals being born? Their existence isn't an accident, it's a part of diversity of life that reflects God's boundless love. If you say that's blasphemous, I want you to explain why. Show your work and then respond to two people to receive full credit. If even other Christians, pastors, and representatives are constantly having to apologize on your behalf, it's probably time to reevaluate how you're showing your so-called love for Jesus. Because from where I'm sitting, that doesn't look like love. It looks like self-righteousness on steroids. I genuinely feel so bad for the peaceful, kind Christians who get drowned out by the loudest, most annoying ones in the spotlight. These are the people who live their faith with love and humility, but are overshadowed by the Christian nationalists who equate obnoxiousness with devotion. And worse, those same loud Christians turn around and attack the kind ones for not being aggressive enough. It's embarrassing to say the least. And instead of taking responsibility, you throw tantrums, cry persecution, and shift the blame onto everyone else like the youngest sibling when they bite the older one and the older one punches them back. If you believe in this loving, oh so great faith you're screaming about, then prove it. Is it really that easier to scream, I'm being oppressed, than to own up to one's own fact that your behavior and the actions of people like you have driven people away? No sane person is attacking Christianity because of its values. They're pushing back because of you, because of the followers' judgment and the arrogance and the constant need to impose your beliefs onto others. Instead of wallowing in self-pity and pointing fingers, actually be what you say your religion is about. Live with love and humility. Prove through your actions that being Christian is something worth aspiring to. Because if all you're spreading is hatred, judgment, and negativity, don't be surprised when people call you out for it. The solution isn't to scream louder or play the victim, it's to be better. As I said at the beginning, there are many wonderful Christians out there who actually embody the kindness and compassion that their religion stands for. But it's infuriating how much these Christians have to clean up after the ones spreading a toxic, homophobic, hellfire-fueled, you're doing everything wrong narrative. It makes me wonder if these rotten apples stuck in Adam's throat have ever even read their own Bible or learned their history. You do realize that Jesus wasn't about gatekeeping love, or that your hateful rhetoric only serves to undermine everything your faith is supposed to stand up for? Then you are doing more harm to Christianity than any Satanist, atheist, or just general outsider ever could. But I don't know, that's just me. Laters.